The Peloponnesian War took place roughly 2,500 years ago, yet the reasons behind it continue to divide historians even today. Some scholars rely closely on the narrative of Thucydides, occasionally supplemented by Xenophon, while others attempt to look beyond the ancient texts and question how complete or how impartial those accounts truly are. Thucydides, however, remains our primary source for the war, and according to him, its causes can be understood on two different levels. The first, which he famously describes as the truest and deepest cause, was the growing power of Athens and the fear this expansion inspired in Sparta and its allies. As Athens became stronger, more confident, and more dominant within the Greek world, the balance that had existed after the Persian Wars began to collapse. Alongside this underlying cause, Thucydides also points to a series of specific incidents that occurred in the decades leading up to the outbreak of war. These disputes, mainly involving Athens and allies of Sparta, did not create the tension on their own, but they brought it to the surface and provided the immediate pretext for open conflict. As Thucydides himself notes, Sparta was not directly involved at the very beginning of these episodes. For a time, it remained cautious and hesitant to intervene. Yet, as the situation escalated and Athenian influence continued to expand, confrontation became increasingly difficult to avoid. Eventually, the accumulated tension led to a full-scale war between Athens and Sparta. Corcyra was a colony of Corinth. In Epidamnus, one of its settlements on the Adriatic coast, intense internal political conflict broke out, leading to the collapse of the democratic regime and the rise of an oligarchy. The Democrats who were expelled from the city first appealed to Corcyra for help, but Corcyra refused to intervene. They then turned to Corinth, which agreed to support them. Corinth intervened militarily, sending forces to Epidamnus. This move alarmed the Corcyraeans, who now found themselves on the brink of war with their former metropolis. Facing Corinth's naval power, Corcyra sought assistance from Athens. After considerable debate, the Athenians decided to intervene, sending a limited naval force, not as full allies, but under a defensive agreement, aiming to prevent Corcyra's fleet from falling into Corinthian hands. Despite this Athenian intervention, the conflict escalated and Corcyra ultimately suffered defeat in the wider struggle. By this point, however, the damage was already done. Athens' involvement had significantly increased tensions because it could be seen as a violation of the 30 years peace signed between Athens and Sparta. At the same time, Athenian actions revealed what many in the Peloponnesian League already feared: the expanding influence and growing ambition of Athens. Potidaea was a Corinthian colony, but it lay in a region that came under Athenian control after the formation of the Delian League. Although the city maintained strong historical and political ties with Corinth, it was nevertheless obliged to pay tribute to Athens as a member of the League. Fearing that Potidaea might align itself openly with Corinth and the Macedonian king Perdiccas, the Athenians decided to act. They imposed a series of restrictive demands. Potidaea was ordered to tear down its seaward walls, to dismiss the Corinthian officials who were sent annually by Corinth, and to provide hostages as a guarantee of loyalty. These demands were perceived as an unacceptable violation of the city's autonomy. As a result, Potidaea revolted. Athens responded immediately by sending forces to besiege the city, while Corinth rushed to support its colony, a move that brought the two powers into direct confrontation. After a long and costly siege, Potidaea eventually surrendered to Athens. The terms were harsh, but revealing of Athenian policy. The men were expelled, while the women and children were initially spared. According to Thucydides, the departing inhabitants were even allowed to take limited personal belongings with them. Each woman was permitted 2 garments and each man only 1 cloak. These details underline both the severity of Athenian control and the calculated nature of its punishment. In the aftermath, Athens settled the city with Athenian clerus, effectively turning Potidaea into a permanent Athenian possession. The conflict deepened Corinthian resentment and further destabilized relations between Athens and Sparta, pushing the Greek world even closer to full-scale war. The third major incident took place in Megara. Athens imposed harsh measures on the city, partly to warn Corinth not to approach Attica, since Megara lay close to the border between the 2 regions and was strategically important. This action, known as the Megarian Decree, banned Megara from trading in Athens and with other members of the Athenian alliance. Because the city relied heavily on trade to survive, this blockade caused serious economic hardship. Thucydides recounts the debates that followed in Sparta in the autumn of 432 BC, when an Athenian delegation was present. Sparta could not allow Corinth to suffer losses at the hands of an increasingly powerful Athens. The Spartans were deeply conflicted. King Archidamus supported caution and opposed immediate war, while the Forstenelaidas pushed for a swift military response. This disagreement highlights how divided Sparta was over how to react to Athens' growing power. Eventually, Sparta sent ambassadors to Athens with a clear offer: revoke the Megarian Decree and war could be avoided. Pericles addressed the Athenian assembly and argued against yielding. He warned that revoking the decree could be seen as submission to Sparta, setting a dangerous stepstone for future demands. Athens, determined to maintain its status as an equal power, refused to back down. War did not break out immediately. A year of failed negotiations followed, but the Megarian Decree became a central cause for dissatisfaction. Pericles convinced the assembly not to give in to Spartan demands, confident that Athens had the resources and strength to prevail if conflict came. This tension set the stage for the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War. Thucydides records in detail the naval and economic resources of Athens, which Pericles believed would give the city an advantage in the coming war. The Athenian fleet included 300 triremes, reinforced by ships from allied islands such as Chios, Lesbos, and Corcyra. Athens could field 13,000 hoplites, 16,000 local troops guarding Attica, and 1,200 horsemen, supported by a treasury funded through taxes and contributions from allies, totaling 6,000 talents. Pericles believed that these resources would allow Athens to dominate the conflict, even though the Peloponnesians could muster over 40,000 hoplites on land. Pericles understood that Athens could not match the Peloponnesians in a direct land battle. Instead, he relied on the city's naval strength, financial resources, and fortified walls to control the seas, protect Attica, and sustain the war effort. So he concentrated a large part of Attica's population within the city to protect them and force the Peloponnesians into prolonged campaigns and attrition, eventually wearing them down. For Pericles, this combination of money, ships, and strategic planning would offset the enemy's numerical advantage on land, forming the basis of Athens' strategy at the very start of the Peloponnesian War.